the purpose actually of this presentation is to talk about the network application onboarding, but more specifically about the features of the 5G-IANA front-end interface, so that everybody starts getting familiar of what to expect. And I think as we go through the whole functionality, perhaps we can answer also some questions we had, or perhaps create also other questions, and that is a matter of having a more interactive discussion also today, or bring some of our questions, let's say, to our meeting tomorrow. Okay. Now I will very quickly go through the role of the Application Orchestrator, where we stand here, what are the key features of the Application Orchestrator, and then go in detail on the overall NetApp onboarding workflow, just presenting a few things, but then of course we will move to the actual example of the interface we have. A small remark before, of course, we start is that some of the features we will talk about are not yet being implemented, or they are under definition. Okay, but then of course we can see about that. Okay, so where we stand here in the upper part, okay, that you will see. Okay, so we're talking essentially about not all of these components, although many of them are included in what I will show in the back end, but mainly we will show the front end of this part, and basically the interface with the end users, how the end users can provide this the information there. Two things, mainly the functions and the NetApps, okay, and I will specify them in more detail. Okay, so this part handles, as I said, the definition of functions, application functions, and network functions that will be used for the NetApps. That is one thing. The second thing is that it handles the deployment and the management of the NetApps. Okay, so there are two main mechanisms here. Okay, it's good to understand this, okay, in order to have those two separately. Okay, and it is, okay, the background from what you will see is based on Ubiquiti development that is called Maestro, or more general terms, the vertical application orchestrator. So many of the things that you will see in the platform, okay, it's good also to sometimes some terminology here, okay, to clarify. You will hear, or you will see about components, okay, that is software components, which are essentially the functions that we are talking in 5G-IANA, application or network functions, okay. And then you will see the application, okay, the building of application from different components, which is essentially the NetApp, okay. Another term that is perhaps we have to change sometime in the future. Network applications in general, okay. So the application orchestrator has two main features. Okay, so one of the first one is of course the deployment of the network applications of the NetApps over the programmable, over targeted programmable infrastructures. Okay, and the second thing, once we have done, of course, the deployment and this is successful and we have allocated the resources, okay, we move towards the reconfiguration of this from the application point of view during runtime. Okay, so there are those two main things. Now, in support of that, we have also specific application-specific, okay, monitoring activities where we monitor the operational status of the application functions. Okay, and several metrics that are included here. We will say also a few things about this one. Okay, and then with respect to the runtime process, we have also the optimization, let's say, processes of the deployment in response to monitoring of vertical service metrics. And I should have added here also some predefined policies, okay, that we have to meet. I guess that everybody by now is familiar with this picture, okay, about the NetApps, okay, very quickly saying, okay, that in order to define certain NetApps. Okay, essentially what we are defining is a chain of functions which can be application-specific functions and network-specific functions. We want them to exist in our catalog, in our repository, in order then to be reused in other instances and either take the actual NetApp as it is in a different infrastructure and of course with a set of parameters that are specific to that infrastructure. Okay, so this set of parameters regarding the deployment and then the operation of the NetApp has to do with the targeted infrastructure where we want to deploy that. Okay, however, application functions and network functions are there, okay, are dependent components that can be reused. And of course, another requirement here with respect to the NetApps is the ability to create new NetApps from existing NetApps. So by taking, for example, one NetApp and another NetApp, combine them or even change them in order to create or add features and etc. So all of these are considered in our case for the interface and for the whole platform, of course, that we are developing. So let me go through some key things about the workflow that you will see in a while. Okay, just to clarify some things first before we go to the actual example. What you will see is a process as it is defined here. So this is the NetApp onboarding, as we say, and operational steps. The first step has to do with the definition of the software to constitute, okay, an application network function. That is basically the onboarding, the registration of the application and network functions. In this case, we go through the process. This is what we will show of registering these functions, okay, as software components, okay, so components, functions, the same thing, with specific parameters, editing and adding the parameters that are required. However, in general, these components, okay, these functions may exist in the catalog or may have been brought, you know, from another catalog, and then in that case, okay, it should appear in our repository, and then simply we can have a pooling of these software components from any external sources, external catalogs, okay, for direct use, for reuse essentially. Okay. The next thing that is allowed by this front-end interface is the creation of the NetApps. So the formation and the update of the NetApps, and this is by creating a NetApp, essentially what we have to do is, that we take several functions, okay, as they have been registered or pulled from another catalog directly here. So we have a list of them, we can take them, okay, and then we can link them together. And that is basically the process of composing a NetApp, or at the end, what we create is a NetApp graph. And the NetApp graph has okay, some connected exposed interfaces, okay, and which are shown. And another functionality that we want to add here is, of course, to take existing NetApps. Okay, you will not see that it's not yet implemented, but the idea here is that we also take existing NetApps in order to reuse the whole NetApp, but also have the capability here to alter some parameters and essentially edit this NetApp. So we can take a certain NetApp, like for example, it was shown before, remove one component and another component, okay, or take a NetApp and then add additional functionalities with a number of additional functions, and essentially creating a new NetApp. Okay, so these are the basic steps. Okay, first we go with the functions. Okay, this may not be required if we have already registered our function. We can go and create directly the NetApps that we want then to instantiate, to deploy. Okay, and we have these two main capabilities that I mentioned. The next step, then moving towards the actual deployment, of this NetApp, is to proceed with the instantiation of the NetApp. And by proceeding to the instantiation of the NetApp, there is a certain number of parameters that have been defined, like where this NetApp will be deployed, what are the networking features, okay, of that infrastructure, where it's going to be deployed, and so on, what are the targeted resources, etc. Okay, once this is instantiated for deployment, okay, it goes through the process which will not be shown here, okay, that has to do with the full platform. So there is an intent that is sent to the slice manager, and then it is the part of the main orchestrator, basically to deploy, to identify the resources, okay, and then communicate back to the application orchestrator, okay, where what are these targeted parts of the resources of the infrastructure where the deployment is going to take place. We proceed with the deployment, the whole NetApp then initiates, and we proceed to the runtime phase of the whole, where we monitor also then the parameters. Okay, that's why then the next step during runtime is that we can have we can see the monitoring parameters, and essentially we can select the number of monitoring parameters to be visualized or create also our own parameters. Okay, and we will talk also about some things here, and of course we can alter then the way that the NetApps operate, okay, by adding some specific policies. Again, I will explain this at the end. How it works. Okay, so I will go quickly through some of the slides. Once we register the function, we go through a number of parameters, okay, that we also go in detail. You will see an environment like that. It's an updated environment, of course, like that, where there is a list of the already existing functions. Okay, as you see here on the left, all of them are under the tab that is called components. In 5G-IANA terms, these are the functions. Okay, so this is a list of the different functions, and of course, then we can create a new function. We have communicated also this file here, the JSON file, with all the different parts, where there are some basics. There are the Docker image information, exposed interfaces, some execution requirements, health check. These are things that needs to be inserted for each function, actually, that is deployed here once we create a new one, or they may be pre-exist from those that we take from the catalog, from the repository. Okay. The next step, of course, then it's the NetApps. And for a NetApp, we have to, if we go through the creation part of the NetApp, we need name, okay, and to create this NetApp. Then we go through a process of picking the functions that we want to link together, which can be application network functions that will appear in the list. We can pick NetApps, okay, to include or extend. That means that we want to add also a list of pre-existing NetApps. So if we want to edit a NetApp, or if we want to take the components of the NetApp and then add new components, creating a new NetApp, okay, or an updated NetApp, this should also be possible here. And then, of course, we have to proceed with the connections for the different interfaces. You see this you will see this under this tab here on the left that is called applications. Applications refers now here to the NetApps. Okay, we have a list, not of the components, but a list of the different NetApps that already have been defined, that pre-exist. And if we then go through the create a new NetApp, you will see, okay, a list of the existing functions. Okay, then from these functions we go through the selection, the plus, and then, for example, if it's a MongoDB function, then this appears, okay, here. We can go through selecting more functions as well, then linking them together, okay, creating a NetApp. If we get one of the pre-existing NetApps, for the next step, what is required is to start filling in some networking parameters which are specific for where the deployment is going to be done. Okay, and this has to do with the links essentially between the different functions that compose the NetApps and more specific informations that are required here. So there will be another configuration tab that appears, okay, where these parameters need to be filled in specifically, again, I'm saying, for where the deployment is going to be done. So all of them are then those NetApps, okay, that have been selected. Perhaps I can go here. Once a NetApp is selected, we go down here and we proceed. If we proceed, then essentially we proceed with the deployment of the NetApp. So we go through the main deployment mechanism, okay, that creates the slice indents, and the slice indents are sent to the slice manager, and then we go towards a deployment phase. Okay, if we don't do that, then under the instances, it appears, you know, as an existing graph, or if it goes towards deployment, then it appears here the status as being successfully deployed, once, of course, it's successfully deployed. Since this is done, then we can have also a number of different things to see, like, for example, we can again view or edit the graph and do some profiling of the elasticity policies, and these are the policies that we'll talk about, or simply go through also the monitoring phase. Okay. Then the final part for the running, okay, applications, there is the monitoring. Okay, the monitoring is the part where we gather specific information, and this information at the moment relates with metrics collected from the running applications. Okay. And we can say more things also in our meeting tomorrow about this. Okay, there is a certain process that is done through the Prometheus engine from where we can select this, or we can define also our own application-related metrics to be monitored, okay, through some through specific parts of each function. Okay, these are function specific. Okay, so all the monitoring characteristics are function specific. Essentially, they are selected up here. So, for example, you see here that it says CPU percentage average, for example. Okay, and execute, and then there is something that is this parameter that is added that can be monitored. Okay. The last part has to do about the NetApp policy settings. I will stop here. I will come back at the end once we go through the demonstration part, and then just conclude with the policy. This is not something that has been yet implemented for the 5G-IANA platform. It has been implemented partially, you know, as a functionality in previous projects, but it requires a lot of reworking at the moment, okay, in order to bring it up to speed. But I will comment more on that. This is for the final cycle release, and but I will say a few things later. So I will pass the presentation to Thanos at the moment, okay, in order to go directly through the platform, and then see from there actually how it works. So Thanos, if you make Thanos.
Yes, I can. Give me just a second. Only 1 second, please. Okay. Is it visible, right?
Yes.
Okay. So, Dimitri, go. Yes, you can.
Yes,
go
I can say a few
through the
things,
features, and I will follow you. Yes, presenting.
Yes, since I have started, I will just highlight some of the things that I have shown before, and then Thanos is much more aware about the technical, you know, stuff that can go into detail. So we have the end user being registered, okay, with credentials, etc. So we skip this part, and this is the environment essentially that we have talked before. Okay, in this environment, I skip for the moment what we see because essentially this is the main dashboard, okay, and the mechanism. If we go to the tab here that says components, that is with components, essentially we have, as I said before, the list of the functions. So components, again, I'm saying it's the application functions or network functions, as we say in 5G-IANA. Okay, and here we have this list of the different functions that already exist in our repository. We may need to do nothing here, okay, because we may have all the functions that are needed, and then we may simply want to go directly to the application and start picking up or even creating a new NetApp. But just for the case that we want now to insert, because this is quite essential, this is basically what definitely we need to do in 5G-IANA. For all the different use cases, for example, we need to do the so-called onboarding of the different application functions and hopefully the network functions if there are no other issues to that. Okay, but definitely the application function. So in order to register them, what we have to do is to go through the create new, that says up there to the right. Okay, and here there are a number of different parameters. One first remark here, we may not need, don't get afraid that you see all of this, all of them, we may not need all of them, but I think that some of them are definitely essential. Thano, please, I don't know if you may explain quickly what these parameters are.
Yes, the mandatory fields required per component is the information that you can see here: a name, an architecture of your application, yes, and if there is let's say a tag for characterizing this component scalable or not. We need to know this a priori. Some distribution-related parameters for pulling the Docker image with all the required credentials and the registries, as you can see here. The minimum execution requirements that identifies from the user the minimum, let's say, resources needed for having a proper deployment of the component. The health check is a way to validate, to verify the component is up and running throughout its life cycle. So you specify an endpoint for the Application Orchestrator to query it periodically. Some environmental variables is with regards to the execution of the software and the application and the environmental variables that it requires in each execution environment. And the exposed interface, which is which you define and explicitly say what services are running for every component you are onboarding. So this tab here identifies the connectivity, let's say, details for the service you expose inside your component throughout its life cycle.
Which is important, actually. This is important when you want to go through the creation of the NetApp, okay, just to configure, what each one of the components, each one of the functions, okay, can expose to another function.
Only to mention here, this is not mandatory field, but it's very crucial as well. The label here, the required interface, let's say section, identifies any potential synergies with any other components that you have already onboarded. So if you can see this list here, these are exposed interface from other services that could be linked with this particular component from this section. That's it. I will not spend any more time. These are the mandatory fields.
Just to mention also here a small detail, because we will need it if you go to the plugins. Okay. Okay, so I think for the plugins thread where you may define a specific application to be monitored, for example, right?
Okay, the plugin section is you can select a way from exporting custom application metrics, because the different variations of softwares and applications and language, programming language, will demand, let's say, specific, adapters, connectors that will export the metrics, the custom metrics of the application user, in order for the orchestrator to identify inside and pull them periodically inside the monitoring engine. This way, the plugin is a way where you actually creating, let's say, an interface with a monitoring engine.
Mm-hmm. It's not required because there is a set of standard monitoring parameters, of course, that are collected through NetData, and these are exposed and they can be monitored. But if we want to have some specific, application-specific parameter to be monitored, okay, so for example, if we have an application function that does some very specific processing, for example, I don't know, an image or something, and you want a certain parameter, that has some delays in the frames that are processed or something, okay, and that must be shown to the end user, and this is a way to do it, actually, to bring through this plugin and be monitored. Okay, so all of these are the different parameters for the components, for the functions, okay, that are registered, okay. We went through the process, as you have seen here, with adding the different parameters, okay, and this is something that has been also communicated at the moment through with the catalog developers, with Nexus, in order then to have exactly this communication between the catalog of existing set of components, but also be able, all of these parameters, okay, to be transferred to this catalog. So if we go back to the main list, okay, once this is created, then essentially at the components, okay, we have this new, if you press the components, yes, then whatever we defined, and this will appear in the list that is shown here. Our next step, okay, once we have the proper set of functions here, is of course to start composing then the NetApp. In order to do that, we go on the left there to the application, okay, and the application again brings from the repository the list of NetApps, in this case, that are available for selection. Now, at the moment, okay, what we have is that we can select one of the existing NetApps and then go directly and proceed with the deployment of this. Okay. However, what we want to do is also to have some additional features. And one of them is, of course, to edit. Okay, so we can take this, and we are going to have, if you press there to the right, okay, this is under development at the moment. Here, instead of just saying creating instance, that means proceeding for deployment, instead of proceeding, it will be another one of these buttons on the left saying edit. Okay, so that means that you can take this and you can edit. But let's see the actual process of how it is to create now a new NetApp. Okay. If it is to create, as I said, a new NetApp, we have this empty space here. Of course, we have to define a certain name for the NetApp. Okay, and once we define this name, okay, then what we have here on the left is the appearance of a list of the different functions, okay, of course, that are available at the moment. Okay, and from this list of functions, we can go, as said, if you can click to some of them, for example, in MariaDB or something else, okay, there you can select. The search is very primitive in this case. There is a search up there, and the search basically searches for the name. Okay, of course, this is something we can also think for future extensions in order to search about specific features and other things. Okay, it has more to do with the catalog. So once we define a couple or more, of course, of these functions, then it is a matter to proceed with the either editing again the parameters, okay, which will not go through this phase, but it's actually creating a link between them, okay, in order to provide the networking features. I think, Thanu, we can go to one of the deployed, okay, already deployed, okay.
So I skipped the part of linking them, right?
Okay, so we link them, okay, and there are certain number and parameters, but we can go to one of the existing ones perhaps to see the different fields that are already there. Okay.
I will close this one. I will go to the already defined. Let's take this one. Okay, test net. Okay, Dimitri.
Okay, so this is one of the already defined parameters. You will see immediately the issue here because you don't see there on the left, for example, again, the list of functions. So by pressing edit, it will go to the previous screen, essentially, and then you will have also on the left the list that you saw before with the different functions. What I forgot to mention is that instead also of the functions that you saw there, we want to have also a list of other NetApps, okay, just in case that we want to combine two NetApps, basically combine the components of different NetApps in creating a new NetApp. So we're going to have this kind of features. We are here in this environment, okay, in order, we cannot edit it at the moment, okay, but we'll have this capability, of course, but there is an important feature here. The feature is that once such a NetApp has been created, you see here 3 functions linked together, okay, what is required before we proceed? Down left, there is a proceed button, which proceeds towards deployment, but before we proceed, what is required is to add some certain networking features. And of course, define where this, what is the selected provider, meaning what is the targeted infrastructure. Okay, so from there, for example, one of these lists up there that it's going to be, for example, the Nokia testbed, okay, or whatever else we're going to define. All right, and we select, of course, where this is going to be deployed. The second thing is then to go through the actual parameters, the link parameters, and just, I don't know if you may go quickly also through this kind of parameters that exist at the moment. Okay, so this is a set of different parameters, okay, and perhaps you can also say what is the plans for adding also further parameters here, right?
Okay, this is actually a way to identify the networking requirements for having the NetApp deployment. So this is we are having this for the time being, going through maximum delay, jitter and packetless throughput, because we have identified that are crucial for specific use cases. This format may be shifted into something different, so potentially link them with a specific network functions that will reside on our repository. So perhaps this view here may be reformed in order to link all these requirements into network functions that will take place in the deployment. So this is currently this form but have in mind that will be actually refactored.
Yeah, it requires some other parameters as well for the components. For example, if you have a certain function, okay, that needs to be deployed at specific locations, okay, so there is definitely, it's at the moment there is a deployment here that defines the location as well, okay, or
yes, this is
the type of service, for example, etc.
The other, let's say, this location that Dimitris is mentioning can be seen here, and all these types of parameters are applying to an already defined NetApp graph before it's going to be instantiated. So it is parameters that are, let's say, not totally independent from the infrastructure that they will be deployed. So to give you a practical example, the components, the three components here are totally independent from on top of what programmable resources they're going to be deployed. So this blueprint here is something that could be replicated for every, let's say, execution deployment of this NetApp, but there are parameters that the user may require that is dependent to the infrastructure. So in that case, the blueprint is populated with specific values that needs to be fulfilled during the deployment on top of the programmable infrastructure. So these requirements are concerning an already created graph that will have this form in all of its life cycle in every deployment, but specific parameters, runtime parameters, may change here, like the selection of a specific location for a specific component or for the whole graph, let's say, and specific networking parameters that on each deployment the NetApp user will define.
Yes, and there are two levels here from what you understand, because there are two windows that Thanos is opening. Okay, one has to do with the link parameters, basically what is shown here. Okay, so two components between them. It's mandatory, for example, to have a certain type of delay or jitter, etc. These are link-dependent pure networking parameters, and the other one is by clicking, of course, the component. Okay, the graph, if you go to the previous one, Thano, okay. So if you click one of the different, yes, exactly, components here, of course, this has all the parameters that are coming from our initial definition, like, for example, the resources, okay, the number of workers, the CPU, RAM, etc. So these are predefined. These are basically what is loaded from the repository, but there are certain additional parameters, okay, that we want to add, that has to do with the targeted infrastructure. Okay, one of them, for example, that has been discussed a lot is the location, and this is the way to identify, for example, in which OBUs we're going to have a certain function running. Okay, so going back and once we have defined each time manually this set of parameters, then basically we go with the proceed. Okay, and once we go with the proceed, if you go to the previous, the generic, yes, then essentially we are transferred to the other tab you see on the left, to the second tab, which has to do with application instances. That is, these are the instances. And in the instances, you see two types. There are the pending, those that have been designed, we put all the parameters, etc., and they are ready.
This is also, yes, can be added here. Is one way before the deployment, the pending one. So
the pending, yes, exactly. So it's one way before deployment is where we edit all of these parameters, and then there are, of course, the deployed. Okay, and For the deployed now, it means that they are up, they are running, okay, and there are a number of parameters, okay, we can check. I think it's important here to see how the monitoring, for example, is done.
Yes, okay, the monitoring. Just give me a second. Okay. The monitor can be seen also here.
Here we see the here we see the deployed graph, okay, of a certain NetApp.
This is the progress during the deployment, let's say, and the time reporting intervals for every component before it's coming alive. So this is also the metrics per component that are coming from the monitoring engine and are also depicting here. So you can see here as well some connectivity information specifically to each component. Okay, I will jump to the precise monitoring. Give me 1 second because there is a domain name that I need to change here. Just a second. Okay. This is the Prometheus specifically for this component I have clicked upon. So as you can see here, it is reporting a couple of metrics. So more or less, it is reporting from the time that we have triggered the deployment.
Can you check the list on top, for example, just to see some examples?
Yes.
The sales list where we can identify.
Yes, the potential the exposed metrics for the time being are here on this list where the user can select, or anyhow the NetApp developer also can handle this. This group list, metric list is quite extensive, but all of these metrics are corresponding to the specific component. So perhaps you may see here some IPv4 or IPv6, but they are networking metrics for the specific components. They have nothing to do with, let's say, end-to-end or something like that. These metrics are coming from the network card of the specific component. So
these are application specific. So in other words, when Thanos said this is coming from the components, it means they're coming from the function. So from each function, okay, that is deployed, okay, each one of those that are deployed, we can select a number of different parameters. And through the process that we saw you before, it requires some steps, but it can be straightforward, okay, with a plugin. We can also define, we can have user-specific, okay, metrics that can be exposed and then collected also from that list there. So once we have selected, as you can see here, a number of different metrics, these are put together, okay, in the format that it is shown. We can see it also over different intervals, etc. I mean, there are different mechanisms also here.
Only to mention here that you can also, you can also specify the time window you would like to extract or to absorb any monitoring data. This also could be done through a URI, like this one here. I mean, this is for programmatically only reasons. If you would like to specifically have metrics up on a specific time slot, this is also available.
Okay, so this is pure monitoring. Okay, so there is nothing more than that. But I think it is essential also then to define what is the next step for that. So, Irene, if I can go back to my presentation. Yes, I can, yes. All right, so I hope you see my screen, right? Okay,
Yes.
so it is also important, okay, since we define this, is to have that we're going to have also the so-called NetApp policy setting. Okay, with the NetApp policy setting, we have some so we have some service-related optimization policies. Okay, optimization policies have to do with the different applications. Okay, that are set. Okay, for each instance, of course, for each NetApp that is deployed. There are some CRUD operations, of course, that can be done with these policies. And as I said, there are two types, okay, that are supported. These are called operational policies, basically the list that you have seen of some standard parameters that are already monitored, or we can have, again, as I mentioned, some application-specific policies that can be extracted. All of them are listed together, and we can have basically intervene with all of them. I will give you some, I think it is important, okay, because at some point we have to define this for all the use cases, and these are very important also for the testing cases that we are going to run, and specifically what happens during runtime, okay. For example, if visualized CPU exceeds 80% for more than any time interval, 80 seconds, okay, whatever is defined, then the action should be for the application orchestrator what? Increase the number of CPUs at the specific component by 1. Else, if the CPU drops below 10%, okay, and this is also for energy optimization, and if this is done for more than a certain interval, it can even be another interval, okay, then you can decrease by 1, provided that, of course, you are not in the just one, okay, that is required, or the minimum one that have been defined during operational. Another example is, for example, to save the total latency, and here is a matter of how this latency will be defined, from where it will be extracted, from where it will be measured, and so on, if there are going to be some specific props for that, okay, or if it is simply the latency of an execution, you know, of an application. There are many things here. So if this certain parameter exceeds, for example, 250 milliseconds, then do some change, like bypass function A, send the traffic directly from function B to function C. Okay, just bypass even some components, you know, some functions internally in order to speed up the process or kill some applications, etc. Okay, or it can be simply be just, you know, have a monitoring and notification, okay, that is sent to the end user. Okay, what is not shown, because it's exactly this part has to do with the runtime process, and this is at the moment under again development. It's more, let's say, under adaptation to the Kubernetes environment that we have for this platform. Okay, it's going to be this policy definition, let's say, environment will be something like that, that we specify a certain policy, and then we can have the expression, like, for example, if the average value, or the high value, or the low value of what component, okay, what function, okay, and we are going to have a certain metric for that. It's greater than or smaller than a certain value. Okay, so you see that there is all of this logic is basically depicted through this part. We can define a period, and also then the actions, okay, that needs to be taken. Okay, so which component, for example, we can have additional workers. Okay, if it is going to scale out, scale in, etc. Okay, so this is quite important. And again, this is under definition, because we need to see what are the actual running testing requirements. Okay, and perhaps we can even specify some other parameters here that are not currently available. But this is the whole logic here. Okay, as I said before, and then I'm closing with this one, is that since everything is done and we have specified, you know, the different functions, and then the NetApp, and we proceed with the slice intent creation. Okay, and this is another big story, of course, in the whole deployment. okay, because this slice intent then from the NetApp it is sent towards the slice manager, okay, which job is to identify then if these resources, the requested resources, are there. So here we have, hopefully here we have, as a result, either the successful creation of the slice, which returns back all the allocated resources, all the IP, let's say, of the resources in order for the application orchestrator to do the deployment of application functions directly, okay, or it returns an error. This is also a small detail of what is the type of error that is returned. And this is something that we can also elaborate more. Like, for example, if we are going to be specific, saying that this specific component, if it is per component, the error, okay, for this specific component, with this and that requirements, I don't have enough resources, for example, to deploy, so that we know that we can deploy it elsewhere, or we can lower the, for example, the need for CPU or memory that is required. Okay, let's keep this also in mind. With this, we are concluding the presentation. I know that perhaps it's too much. Okay, I hope that we have managed to explain it in a clear way, and I think it's good that I don't know, we have some time also for any questions, you know, in additional discussions. You need to see your details you see here, or I don't know if you have taken your notes again, we can discuss them also at another instance tomorrow. We can go into detail. Of course, all of this material will be available to go in detail. So thank you very much, and then it's open to any questions or things that you would like to go in further detail.
Thank you, Dimitris. This is Dinos. Thanks a lot for this presentation. I think it was very much needed, and it's enlightening for many of the partners here. Mostly, my comments are related to aspects that you have already mentioned, and are actually more subject to the discussions that we are going to have the following days in the face-to-face rather than here. Just noting this, for example, I think that the policy part is very much important, and in a broader sense, the deployment, the focus on the deployment aspects regarding the selection of nodes in the presence of the far edge segment. You mentioned at some point the selection of the OPUs, which becomes runtime because of the dynamicity of these resources. Exactly. But it's not something.
I have this exactly as also the critical points, or some of the critical points to be discussed. Okay, also in the meeting. So this. The resources, I think also the monitoring parameters has to do with the DMLO as well, and how the whole logic will be implemented as well, and use the monitoring. I think this is important to start clarifying all of these aspects. Okay, I hope that it helps, at least from the point of view of the front end, what already exists, and I think there is a certain number of parameters that exist in order to showcase, okay, something nice at the end. And definitely also our interest here is, you know, to properly extend it. Okay, we are working very close with networks also here, and there are many things in the background that have been defined, for example, about the localization, all about this, as I said, the intent creation and how this will be done. There is also, you know, the connection with the catalog, you know, with all the parameters you have seen and the information there. What are the parameters that definitely needed for the catalog and repository, and what are the parameters that must be defined by the user at the end. Okay, this is also quite important, and I hope that we made that clear. So for any deployment of a NetApp, there is this list of parameters at the end, networking parameters that must be defined. Others, though, that has to do with the function, with how the functions are linked to form NetApps, okay, are predefined. It can go into the catalog. I think we have reached a very good I hope that Nexus agrees with that, but I think we have reached a quite good, let's say, level of understanding here, so we can move towards at least the deployment of that part.
One additional item for discussion, I would say, is the following. We have these components, the application functions, and we have the network level interfaces defined, including also I would couple that with monitoring plugins, which is needs to be discussed what exactly these shall include, but I'm not focusing on that. Part of the value that we intend to bring here with 5G-IANA is that of reusability, and you mentioned it. We have a component that is going to be reused, a whole NetApp that can possibly be reused, and this is very much based on the interoperability, let's say, with the additional add-on components / application functions that are expected to be brought by the newcomers, let's say, by the third parties, by also the use case owners within the project that will build on someone else's application function or component, or even NetApp. Now, with respect to this aspect with the interfaces, I think we need to discuss whether and how we should or we should not expose higher level information regarding the interfaces, meaning that, for example, an HAITS CAM function may support a certain, just speaking of an example, I'm not sure this actually holds, but just to give an to illustrate what I'm trying to say, an application function may be reachable at a certain port, but then when it is coming from a third party, or it is to be used by a third party, it would be useful to know what kind of higher level interface it exposes. For example, it could be a REST API, and then we need to have somewhere some kind of indication of what exactly this application function exposes, so that the application developers, the third parties, know how exactly to use it. Because if it is only for network reachability, let's say, that I can use that port and reach the application function, the existing component, that's part of the solution. I'm not saying let's expose everything on the GUI level. I'm just saying let's think about it, how to facilitate some understanding between existing functionality and existing interfaces on the application level now, not only on the network level. Just as a side note.
Yes. Okay. So this is. These are important things to define, okay, because as we can understand, this sets quite significant changes as well, okay, but to a certain extent, these are possible to be done, okay. Okay, it's good to take this kind of ideas. I think it can be useful as well. Now, it is important also to hear, the opinion from those who are going to bring different components, okay, here, basically functions. What I mean, okay, it's going to be the NetApps, how, if they refer to full understanding, or I wouldn't mind even telling us, that it's complicated or difficult, okay, but it's good if there are also some comments on your side. Or perhaps you may want to digest it first, and then think more. Okay, so
Hi, Dimitris. Claudio from Biologics. First of all, I want to thank you for the very clear and effective presentation, also to Thanos. I think that the process is really, as you said, straightforward. So no objection. No problem understanding the process as a whole. Just 2 points. One, regarding the representation, maybe you already talked about that, and I was distracted, let's say. One regarding the representation of the elements that link every NetApp or component into the repository, so that things that are designed through the UI can be saved and reused afterwards for automatic onboarding or for reconfiguration of the schema of the graph. And the second point goes where Dinos was pointing out, or maybe can be linked to that. From what I got from the presentation, I think that the interfaces, the parameters of the application configured through linking together NetApps and components are hard-coded into the structure of a certain NetApp or component. That are the names of the interface of the parameters, but the values of that parameters are live and only exist inside let's say a live session while the application is actually running, so that in case we want to rework the graph and link other NetApps or other components, we can just rely on the names of that properties and trust that we can change the values of each property in order to interface what we want to change.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I think it is important in this case if we can use some specific examples. Okay, since we have the meeting and we're going to be face-to-face there. Okay, it's good, for once we present the use case to start going into specific examples of what is required. Okay, and then see also how such parameters can be exposed, changed, etc. during runtime. And I think it is important to do it now. I mean, at this time, so we have also time to, include them or, correct some things. Okay, please have this in mind once we present, to go through certain examples, what is expected. Go through a process even, once we have, for example, your use case, through the process of how this is expected, to be, if not actually deployed, but how it is expected, at this stage to be deployed and what would that require. Okay. Because also from our side, okay, what we tend to do is to circulate, something like an Excel file in order to start collecting certain parameters. Okay, parameters that we have presented. Okay, it's good to be collected because I think it will help a lot during the onboarding, first of all, of the different functions, application functions, and network functions. Okay, so all of these parameters is good to be known beforehand and how these are linked together. It will help a lot during our integration, let's say, part once the platform, or at least the first cycle, is ready to, because we will need anyhow to go through this process. Okay, so let's keep this in mind. Okay, that we can focus more on this kind of parameters and what is required, and even again use the platform, as an example, like more day after, and then go very specifically, for example, for one use case, right? It doesn't need to be done for all use cases, just as an example to see what such requirements would be. Okay, please have this also in mind to be more specific there. I think it will help them also. Okay. I don't know if there are any other comments, or Irini, I don't know, how do you want to proceed? If there are no more comments, I think
yes, we can close the webinar, and thank you again very much for preparing this. It was very useful. And I will stop the recording and also share with you.
Okay, perfect. Thanks a lot, everybody. Okay, and nice to see you also, most of you at least,